The raindrops were lightly hitting the windows, but the silence inside was suffocating. Rachel stood frozen in the doorway of her daughter's bedroom, her fingers trembling as they gripped the frame. It had been 12 days since Claire had disappeared, but the room still carried the scent of her lavender perfume, as if she could walk through the door at any moment. The walls were pale blue, Claire's favorite color, but now it felt cold and far away. On one side of the room were posters of pop stars and movie quotes. On the other were shelves full of books, notebooks, and half-empty magazines. Rachel's eyes fell on Claire's desk. Although no one had touched it, the lamp was still on, casting a dim, yellow light. A picture frame on the nightstand caught her eye. It was Claire's favorite picture, the two of them laughing and so happy on the beach last summer. Rachel ran her thumb along the edges of the frame. She had never imagined that day would turn into a memory she would cling to so desperately. Her eyes drifted to Claire's backpack, still where she had left it, leaning against the chair. He reached for the backpack out of breath. Slowly, he unzipped the main compartment. Inside, she found crumpled papers, a water bottle, and a folded note tucked into a side pocket. Rachel's pulse quickened. She opened the note carefully, her eyes scanning the handwritten words. "Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't know what else to do." Her heart stopped for a moment. What was Claire sorry for? What had she done? Rachel's legs buckled and she collapsed on the edge of the bed, clutching the note in trembling hands. Her mind replayed every argument, every slammed door, every moment she might have missed a sign, something that could have told her this was going to happen. The rain outside grew heavier, matching the rhythm of Rachel's rapidly beating heart, and in that moment, Rachel knew one thing for sure. She hadn't just lost Claire. She had let her down. Rachel was curled up on the couch, the crumpled note still in her hand. She had read it so many times that the ink looked blurred, but no matter how often she tried, the words never made sense. His phone rang. The sudden sound stunned him, and he lost his balance and almost dropped it before he answered. "Hello? Mrs. Patterson?" The voice was low and steady, but Rachel felt the weight behind her. "Yes, this is Rachel. Who is this?" "Detective Harris, ma'am. I need to talk to you about your daughter." Rachel's stomach tightened. Her grip on the phone turned white-knuckled. "Did you find her? Is she okay?" There was a pause, just long enough for Rachel's breath to catch in her throat. "We found something by the river about 20 miles outside of town. We think it might be Claire's." The river. Rachel's mind raced. Claire had always hated the water. She wouldn't even step near the shoreline the last time they went to the beach. "What do you mean, something?" "A necklace. Silver, with a heart pendant. Does it look familiar?" Rachel's free hand shot to her neck, but her own locket. The matching one was still there. The breath left her body. "Yes, that's hers," she whispered. "Where is she? Did you—" "We haven't found him yet," the detective interjected gently. "But we're doing everything we can." Rachel's vision blurred. She felt like the couch was tilting, but she couldn't move. She couldn't breathe. "Miss Patterson?" The detective's voice brought her to her senses. She swallowed hard, forcing the words out. "I'll be there. Right now." She hung up before he could argue. Her hands trembled as she grabbed her keys, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. The roads were slick with rain as Rachel drove to the station. The whole world felt too big, too empty, too dark. As she pulled into the parking lot, Rachel sat in the car for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. Her daughter's necklace. She had never taken it off. Rachel squeezed her eyes shut, willing herself not to fall apart. Not yet. When she opened the door and stepped out, her heart was beating so loudly she could barely hear the raindrops hitting the pavement. Claire was out there somewhere, and Rachel wasn't going to stop until she found her. Rachel walked into the police station, and her heart felt like it would stop the moment she entered. She sat down in a chair next to one of the desks at the entrance. Across the desk from her, Detective Harris placed a small evidence bag in front of her. Inside was Claire's silver necklace, the one Rachel had given her for her 13th birthday. Rachel gasped as she reached for it, but Harris pulled her back slightly. "I'm sorry, Ms. Patterson. We need to keep this as evidence." "Evidence for what?" Rachel's voice cracked. "You said you couldn't find him, so what does that mean?" Harris exhaled slowly, choosing his words carefully. "He was found near the riverbank, caught on some branches in the water. It doesn't tell us much yet, but it's a start." "A start?" Rachel's voice rose. "It doesn't feel like a beginning. It feels like an end." The detective looked down, avoiding Rachel's eyes. That was all Rachel needed to see. She leaned back in the chair, pressing her fingers against her temples. Images flashed through her mind. Claire laughing at the kitchen table. Claire singing along to the radio. Claire slamming her bedroom door. All he could see now was the necklace glinting coldly through the plastic. "Did you check the area? The whole area? We've searched a mile in both directions. We're expanding further tomorrow." Rachel's fist tightened. "Tomorrow? You think I can sit at home and wait? While my daughter is out there, what, alone? Scared?" Harris softened. "I understand, Mrs. Patterson, but you need to trust the process." Rachel shook her head. "You don't understand. I can't go home." She stood up suddenly, her chair scraping the floor. "I need to see it." Harris hesitated. "The site? Yes. It's not a good idea. It's muddy, and the current is, I don't care." The conviction in her voice startled even herself. Harris finally nodded. "Okay, but I'm coming with you." The river was louder than Rachel had expected, its dark waters churning under the gray sky. She stood on the bank, her shoes muddy, staring at the spot where they had found Claire's necklace. The trees leaned overhead, their branches bare and skeletal. Rachel knelt and touched the ground, the damp earth soaking her jeans. Somewhere out there, Claire was waiting for her. Rachel's knees sank deeper into the mud as the cold seeped through her skin, but she didn't even notice. Her eyes were fixed on the spot where Claire's necklace had been. The earth was disturbed, the mud flattened, the branches broken. Someone had been here recently. Detective Harris stood a few feet behind her, shifting uncomfortably. "Mrs. Patterson, we've combed this area. There's nothing more to—" Rachel interrupted him by raising her hand. "Look." She pointed to faint footprints leading to the water's edge. Harris moved closer, his flashlight cutting through the fog. "Those could belong to anyone," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. Rachel stood, her hands trembling as she traced the footprints with her eyes. "They're small. These are hers." Harris's expression hardened as he knelt and examined them. "They're fresh." Rachel's breathing quickened. She was here. The detective's radio crackled. "Harris, we've got something north side of the river." Rachel froze. What happened? Harris ignored her and spoke into the radio. "I'm on my way." "What did they find?" Rachel asked. But Harris was already on the move. He ran after her, his heart pounding against his ribs. The scene was chaotic. Officers lining the riverbank, flashlights dancing across the water. Rachel pushed through the crowd, ignoring the calls to stop her. And then she saw it. A shoe floating near the shore. It was Claire's shoe. Pink, with a faded butterfly pattern on the side. Rachel stumbled forward, but Harris grabbed her arm. "Wait! We need to check." "That's hers!" Rachel screamed, trying to break free. We don't know what else is out there." Harris tightened his grip. Rachel's knees gave out, and she crumpled to the ground. The weight of it, the shoe, the footprints, the necklace was too much. An officer waded into the water, picked up the shoe and handed it to Harris. Rachel reached for it, but Harris wouldn't let go. "It could be evidence. It could be evidence." Rachel's voice broke. "It's not evidence, it's Claire." But as she stared at the muddy, soaked shoe, her hope began to fracture. Claire had been here, and now Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that her daughter wasn't coming back. Rachel sat on a damp log near the riverbank, Claire's shoe still fresh in her mind. The air was thick and heavy, the sound of rushing water filling the silence between her and Detective Harris. She felt hollow, as if the world had drained her of everything except fear. "You're sure it's hers?" Harris asked, breaking the stillness. Rachel clutched her knees. She wore them every day. She wouldn't go anywhere without them. Harris nodded, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt, a doubt Rachel couldn't afford to entertain. "What now?" Rachel asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "We keep searching." Rachel stood abruptly. "Not we, me. Mrs. Patterson, that's not safe. The current is strong and it's getting dark." "You don't understand," she snapped. "She's out there, alone, scared, and I can't sit here waiting for someone else to find her." Before Harris could stop her, Rachel took off along the river's edge, her shoes sinking into the mud with every step. Her breath was sharp and shallow, but she pushed forward, branches scraping against her arms as she climbed through the brush. She stopped when she saw it, another piece of Claire's world. A torn pink scarf caught on a low-hanging branch, soaked and clinging like a ghost. Rachel's hands trembled as she reached for it. The scent hit her first. Faint, but unmistakable. Vanilla, Claire's favorite. Rachel pressed it to her face, her tears mixing with the rain. "Claire!" she shouted, her voice echoing across the water. "Claire, can you hear me?" Only the river answered, its relentless flow swallowing her cries. Behind her, Harris appeared, his flashlight cutting through the trees. "Rachel, you need to stop." "I can't." She turned to face him, her eyes wild. "I need to find her before it's too late." "You need to let us do our job." Rachel shook her head, backing away. "You don't get it. This isn't just a job. This is my daughter." Her foot slipped on the wet ground and she fell, the scarf tumbling from her grip. Harris was there in seconds, pulling her up. "We will find her," he said firmly, "but not like this." Rachel wanted to fight him, to keep running until she found something, anything. But the exhaustion finally caught up with her. She sagged against him, the weight of the scarf in her hand the only thing keeping her from collapsing completely. As the rain fell harder, Rachel let Harris lead her back to the clearing. But her mind refused to rest, because somewhere out there, Claire was still waiting. Rachel stood at the edge of the riverbank, staring at the rippling water. Detective Harris was nearby, speaking softly to another officer, but Rachel barely heard them. She knelt down, her fingers brushing the wet soil. "Claire," she whispered, "I'm here." She thought of the night she had tucked Claire into bed, the way she used to sing her favorite lullabies. She thought of the mornings they spent laughing over pancakes, and the afternoons they argued over silly things. And she thought of the pain Claire must have felt, pain she had hidden so well. Rachel closed her eyes and let the tears fall. Rachel waited there until morning that night, and in the morning Detective Harris drove her home. Days turned into weeks, and still there were no answers. The search teams found Claire's shoes, but no body, no closure. Rachel couldn't decide if that was better or worse. She began leaving the porch light on at night, just in case. She left Claire's room untouched, the bed unmade, the calendar frozen on April 17th. And every night she sat by the window, staring out into the darkness, hoping to see her daughter's face. Months passed. The phone stopped ringing, the detective stopped calling, and the world moved on. But Rachel didn't. She carried Claire's necklace everywhere she went, running her fingers over the tiny pendant whenever the ache in her chest became too much. She started writing letters to Claire, letters she knew would never be read. "I miss you. I'll always miss you." And yet, she kept living. Not because she wanted to, but because she had to. Rachel walked along the river every evening, watching the water, hoping one day it would give her back what it had taken. But deep down, she knew some things are never found.